Hi guys, hope you're having a good week. You're basically going to listen to this and you can take notes. I will be checking your notes for a grade when I get back, so you do need to write them down. You can pause the video if I go too fast, which I probably will, and then you can take them and just keep going when you're done writing. So this chapter is chapter 44. We're skipping all the way to animal behavior. It's a short chapter and fairly easy, so it shouldn't be too bad. We'll review when I get back next week, so if you don't get some of it, don't worry, we can go through examples and practice and review when I get back. Section 1 is about the development of behavior. So when we think about behavior, we want to think about what are some of animals' behavior. Now remember, an animal, we haven't talked too much about this, but an animal is, you are an animal. There's all sorts of things. Most of the time we think about like lions and sheep and I don't know, bears and all sorts of things. All of those are animals. So what are some behaviors that they have, and what are some advantages to their behaviors? What are some adaptive advantages they have? So think about those things a little bit as we go through this section. So first of all, what is the study of behavior? Well, ethologists are biologists who specialize in the scientific study of animal behavior. These are people who are going to study all of these behaviors and figure out how they work and what those behaviors are for and what they mean. Well, a behavior itself is any action that an individual carries out in response to a stimulus or to its environment. So it's going to be anything that the animal does that's going to be caused by something in the environment. So it's going to be a response to a signal, a response to a sign, something that is in the environment that causes it to do something, okay? And that what it does is the behavior. So for example, a snake playing dead. The act of it playing dead is the behavior. It's caused by something else. Or a chimpanzee gathering termites on a stick. All of those are behaviors. Well, there are four main questions that we're going to look at when we study behavior. We're going to look at what causes the behavior, what is the role of genes in the behavior, what is the behavior's evolutionary history, and how does the behavior affect the organism's survival and reproduction. So those are the four questions that we're going to look at as we go through this section. The first one, we want to look at how are genes and behaviors influenced. Okay. Well, we study this by they can mate an animal that shows the behavior to a mate that does not. And when we observe that offspring, so the offspring that those two have, we want to see, does it have the behavior or does it not? How was it passed on? How was it affected in the genes? So think back to genetics when we studied whether it was dominant or recessive. This is kind of how they do that when they mate them together to see how that's passed on. The next thing that we look at is natural selection in behavior. We know that through natural selection, organisms or animals are going to behave in ways that help them survive and reproduce. Remember, in natural selection, the goal is to survive and reproduce. So they're going to adapt behaviors that help them to survive and reproduce so that they can pass on their traits. One of the types of behaviors, or when we look at behaviors, we can look at innate behaviors. If something is innate, it's actually an instinct. So when you hear about innate behaviors, we're going to talk about instincts. So innate behaviors or instincts. These are inherited actions that are performed effectively the first time without being taught. So you're going to be able to do it the first time. You don't have to have somebody teach you how to do it. It doesn't matter if your mom abandons you, if your parents, a lot of animals, they lay their eggs and they don't ever come back to them. So it's important that they have good instincts. An example of this is a spider spinning a web or a bird building a nest. They're going to do it the first time perfectly. They don't have to practice. They don't get better at it. They're going to do it the first time without being taught. Those are instincts or innate behaviors. When we talk about innate behaviors, we can have what are called fixed action patterns. A fixed action pattern is a type of innate behavior that all the members of the species perform the same way each time. So it's going to kind of be a routine, a pattern that all of those species are going to do the same way. And they're going to continue this from the start to the finish without modification once it gets triggered. So once this action is triggered, it's going to keep going. There's no stopping it. So for example, a snake sees a predator. It goes through this fixed action pattern of hissing in response. It might raise up its head, and then it's going to hiss at you, and it's going to continue that pattern until it's finished. It's going to continue without modification once it starts. And again, this is an instinct. This is an innate behavior. But that whole pattern is called a fixed action pattern. We'll watch these videos when I get back, so I'm just going to skip through those. The next type of behavior, or how a behavior works, is called a learned behavior. A learned behavior is a behavior that is modified by experience. This is not something that you are born knowing how to do. You need to watch, you need to learn, you need to practice. Okay? It's something that's going to get better with time. Now there are 4 types of learned behavior that we're going to talk about. The first type of learned behavior is called habituation. When you look at that word, it's kind of like a habit. Okay? Habituation sounds like habit. This is the simplest type of learning. When we go through habituation, the animal is going to learn to ignore a frequently harmless stimulus. So they're going to learn to ignore something that really isn't harmful to them. They don't need to be affected by it. This is going to save them energy and allow for other everyday activities. An example of this are gold chicks ducking. When these gold chicks were born, they had an instinct to duck whenever they saw a shadow from the sky. Well, through time, they learned that some of the shadows that were long necks weren't going to harm them. The long necks might have been like geese or swans, and they weren't going to eat them, so they didn't have to duck at them. But if it was a short neck, it might be a hawk, and they needed to continue to duck at those. Habituation is forming a habit. They learn that they don't have to waste that energy with those sort of things. The second type of behavior is called operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is a type of trial and error learning. And during this, you're going to learn to associate some type of action or operation, which is called the operant, with a punishment or reward. So these specific behaviors are going to be deterred or reinforced by external actions upon the animal. An example of operant conditioning is training your dog. Your dog learns to associate a specific action with a punishment or reward. It's going to learn to sit because you give it a treat. Okay? It's going to learn to associate some of those things together. B.F. Skinner is a famous psychologist who studied rats, and he is a very famous person in operant conditioning. You don't have to write this stuff down below it about him, but we'll talk about it. What he did is he put them in a box with a lever and he gave them food. The rats accidentally pressed it and they got food. So they learned that pressing the lever would get them food. That's operant conditioning. The third type of learning is called classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is a type of learning in which an animal learns to produce a specific response to a predictive stimulus. They're going to anticipate reinforcement. So they're going to do the behavior before it happens because they think that it's going to happen. An example of this is Pavlov's dogs. Another example of this would be like feeding your fish. When you open the tank, the fish come up because they've been trained. Here's training your dogs. They've been trained to know that if you open it, they're going to get food. Pavlov did this with dogs, and we're going to watch this when we get back. But what he did is he rang a bell, every time he gave them food. And they learned that if they rang the bell, it meant that he got food. So what they did is when they get food, it's an instinct to drool. So every time he rang the bell, he would give them food and they would drool. So what happened is he would ring the bell and they would drool even if he didn't give them food. The fourth type of learned behavior is called problem solving, or of learning is called problem solving or reasoning. Okay? In this, an animal uses several learning mechanisms to learn a type of behavior. So for example, they can watch an older offspring or they can use trial and error, but they don't have to pair it with something else. They just are going to kind of know how it works. So a chimpanzee uses a tool to get termites out of a nest. They're going to kind of use things that they've already known, they've already learned, and apply it to this. Reasoning goes along with this, and reasoning involves the ability to solve a problem not previously encountered by the individual, but this is not instinct. So think of this, if you get a new video game, do you read the instructions? How do you know how to play? You've never played it before, and you don't have an instinct to know how to play it, but you use what you already know to learn how to do it. This occurs without trial and error. It's actually called insight learning. You already know some things, so you're going to apply that to it and be able to do it. Use reasoning. Another example is a child moving a chair to reach a cookies. They may not have ever got the cookies off that high shelf before, but they know that if I stand on something, I can reach something up high. So they can apply it to a new situation. So let's talk about genes, learning, and behavior. Animal behavior is affected both by genes and by experience. One thing that involves this is called imprinting. Imprinting is a behavior that is determined by both genes and by learning. They both work together. Learning in which a young animal forms a permanent association with its environment. So they're going to be able to form an association with something that's happening in his environment. Imprinting occurs during a specific phase in the animal's behavior. This is called the sensitive period, and this is usually right when they first are born. There's going to be this period of time where they're going to imprint, and usually they imprint on something. They're going to form an attachment. And this learning can occur during this time, and it's very difficult to change. Konrad Lorenz did an experiment with ducks, and he found out that if he was the first moving object that these birds saw, they would think that it was they were his mom, and he would follow it. So he was the first moving object they saw, they imprinted on him, they formed an attachment with him, and they followed him. Okay. So that is imprinting. Imprinting has to do with genes and behavior because it goes both ways. They have to already have some things built into their genes, but yet it's also a learned behavior. Here are some examples. You might test yourself, see if you can figure out which they are, if they're innate or learned, and if it's learned, what type of learning. And we'll go through them when we get back. Okay. You do have some questions that are in Classroom, so after you get finished taking these notes, you can go ahead and work on your questions. And we'll do section 2 next time. Thank you. Have a good day.